In the stark, unforgiving skies of North Africa, Hans-Joachim Marseille, revered as the Star of Africa, engaged French ace pilot James Denis in the first of two aerial duels. Piloting his Messerschmitt Bf 109, Marseille, renowned for his tactical brilliance and more than 100 air victories, swiftly maneuvered to gain the upper hand as Denis Hawker Hurricane emerged from beneath a cloud cover. With precise control, Marseille executed a deflection shot, firing ahead of his target, a technique few could master with such menacing grace. He timed his attack to target the enemy's engine and propeller hub. His gunfire was effective, sending Denis' fighter crashing into the ground, its pilot spared by a stroke of fortune. Before he could celebrate his victory, Marseille realized the extent of the damage to his own aircraft. In the heat of their exchange, Denis had managed to return fire, riddling Marseille's Bf 109 with 30 bullets. The damage was extensive, jeopardizing the integrity of his aircraft and forcing Marseille himself to perform an emergency landing near Tobruk. The two pilots both lost their aircraft, but they would meet again in the skies soon enough, each determined to prove who was the better ace. Born on December 13, 1919, Hans-Joachim Marseille was not your typical military prodigy. Descended from Huguenot refugees who fled 18th century France for Germany, Marseille inherited a blend of French defiance and German discipline, traits that would define his prowess as a German ace. Despite a fragile health from early childhood illnesses and a rebellious streak that often put him at odds with authority, Marseille's unlikely journey from a frail boy to a legendary fighter pilot began against all odds. Hans-Joachim Marseille's complex nature was further shaped by his father, Siegfried, a decorated World War I officer who exposed him to Berlin's vibrant nightlife. Embracing a life filled with indulgences, Hans quickly became known as a natural womanizer. Yet, the call of the skies was irresistible to a spirit as untamed as Marseille's. In November 1938, with the clouds of war gathering on the horizon, Marseille joined the Luftwaffe for the thrill of adventure and to give his life a purpose. Despite being a natural pilot, Hans was no obedient cadet. He was a maverick in the sky. His first solo flight was a rite of passage and a spectacle, as he piloted a Focke-Wulf FW-44 Stieglitz with the agility of an ace, chasing invisible enemies through the clouds. This impressive display of ability came at a cost. While his comrades ascended the ranks, Marseille did not receive a commission. The rebel in him could not be tamed. During a training flight, Marseille disobeyed orders and landed in an empty stretch of the Autobahn to relieve himself. Local farmers reported his indiscretion, leading the pilot to be grounded. Werner Schroer, one of Marseille's friends, said, quote, "He was the most amazing and ingenious combat pilot I ever saw. He was also fortunate on many occasions. He thought nothing of jumping into a fight outnumbered 10-1, often alone, with us trying to catch up to him. He violated every cardinal rule of fighter combat. He abandoned all the rules." Nevertheless, to everyone's surprise, Marseille graduated with outstanding grades on July 18, 1940, just in time for the Battle of Britain. On August 24th, Marseille engaged the British enemy for the first time. He was just 21 when he was thrown into a 4-minute dogfight aboard one of the Luftwaffe's most iconic fighters, the Messerschmitt Bf 109. Employing his unconventional combat tactics, the German pilot took down a Royal Air Force Hurricane, or Spitfire, by striking it with its 20mm MG-FF cannons in the engine cowling and the propeller hub. The fireburst caught the British fighter after a quick dive that set Marseille for the lethal barrage, claiming his first victory. He was not safe, however, as a squadron of enemy fighters went after him over the English Channel. To survive the machine gun burst of the British, Marseille went into a steep dive and pulled up when he was just a few meters above the water. Although he survived, Marseille was reprimanded for leaving his fellow wingman alone in the fight, a trait that would manifest in the future with other airmen with whom he worked. Luftwaffe pilots fought in pairs called Route. 2 pairs operated as a 4-plane unit called a Schwarm. German pilots were instructed never to leave their wingmen in combat. It was a basic rule of Luftwaffe airmen that got Marseille grounded for jeopardizing the life of his airmate. Throughout the Battle of Britain, Marseille's intrepid maneuvers would allow him to down over 6 enemy aircraft at the cost of hammering his own while jeopardizing the lives of his brethren. A young Marseille would bail out over the Channel 6 times. During his last operation in Britain, Marseille again broke formation to go after his 6th trophy and left his Schwarm commander, Staffelkapitän Adolf Bull, exposed to enemy fire. As fate would have it, while Marseille's Bf-109 made daring maneuvers in the sky, dogfighting with his prey, Staffelkapitän Bull was overrun by British fighters and shot down. He perished due to Marseille's negligence. No Luftwaffe pilot from his unit trusted him. They knew the arrogant Marseille would not protect them in combat and would instead be consumed by the thrill of the hunt. Thus, despite an impressive 8 enemy shootdowns in less than a dozen missions, Marseille was transferred to the scorching heat of North Africa to center him on his military duties and keep the lad out of range to find women. Oberlieutenant Rudolf Resch later recalled that Marseille was, quote, extremely handsome. He was a very gifted pilot, but he was unreliable. He had girlfriends everywhere, and they kept him so busy that he was sometimes so worn out that he had to be grounded. His sometimes irresponsible way of conducting his duties was why I fired him, but he had irresistible charm. Marseille joined the first group of Jagdgeschwader 27, led by seasoned ace Eduard Neumann, another eccentric personality in the Luftwaffe, who was renowned for enjoying the pleasure of sleeping in a circus wagon he had acquired in France and shipped to North Africa. Pilots stationed in the continent gathered to drink and talk around this one-of-a-kind place Neumann had established. The veteran pilot who had flown since the Spanish Civil War saw firsthand the potential Marseille had as a fighter pilot if he was correctly mentored and stripped away of his vices of women and partying. As the voice of reason and experience, Edward did his best to calm Marseille in combat, instructing him to maintain his pace against the enemy, rally around his airmen, and avoid charging straight into the first target he sighted. It was to no avail. During his 3rd sortie over the skies of North Africa on April 23, 1941, he achieved another victory over a Hawker Hurricane flown by French ace pilot James Denis. However, in this daring assault, the French fighter landed 30 hits on Marseille's Bf-109, with some of the rounds missing his upper body by mere inches. The German pilot crash-landed near Tobruk. This was not the end of the rivalry between both men. A month later, on May 21, 1941, James Denis shot down Marseille after a furious dogfight above the skies of Tobruk behind Axis lines. Despite crashing 2 valuable Bf-109s already, the intrepid Luftwaffe pilot was back in the sky in no time and claimed another victory that was recorded by Jan Jindrich, a Polish soldier who wrote, quote, "When a Blenheim came roaring down over our heads at about 50 feet, there was a terrific rattle of machine gun fire, and at first I thought the Blenheim had made a mistake and was firing at us or choosing an awkward spot to clear his guns. Bullets whistled around, so we dived into the slit trench. A Messerschmitt, hot on the tail of the Blenheim, was responsible for the bullets. The Blenheim roared down the wadi out to sea, trying to escape from the Messerschmitt, but the Messerschmitt was too close. The Blenheim fell out of the sky and crashed into the sea. The plane disappeared completely, not leaving a trace. The Messerschmitt banked and flew inland again." Marseille crashed another 4 costly Bf-109E fighters in the following weeks, leading him to be grounded by Neumann, who once again urged the young pilot to keep his temper in combat. In June 1941, Marseille was finally promoted to 2nd lieutenant after achieving 11 kills. When asked about his reckless fighting tactics, the pompous pilot once told his comrade Hans-Arnold Stahlschmidt, quote, "I often experience combat as it should be. I see myself in the middle of a British swarm, firing from every position and never getting caught. Our aircraft are basic elements, Stahlschmidt, which have got to be mastered. You've got to be able to shoot from any position, from left or right turns, out of a roll, on your back, whenever." Marseille concluded, quote, "Only this way can you develop your tactics. Attack tactics that the enemy cannot anticipate during the battle. A series of unpredictable movements and actions, never the same, always stemming from the situation at hand. Only then can you plunge into the middle of an enemy swarm and blow it up from the inside." Although successful, this tactic often resulted in Marseille's aircraft receiving damage from all directions, rendering it useless for repairs. Neumann ordered the new lieutenant to shift these aggressive attack maneuvers to preserve his plane, which came at an enormous cost to the Luftwaffe. Reckless as ever, Marseille decided to create a new attack program to increase his situational awareness in a dogfight and his marksmanship when engaging the enemy. All these points revolved around his personal deflection shooting technique. Marseille excelled with this tactic, which involved aiming ahead of an enemy fighter to hit it, considering the target's speed and direction. Marseille became an expert at this, allowing him to shoot with unmatched accuracy during high-speed aerial dogfights. Unlike many pilots who relied on closer, more direct shots, Marseille mastered shooting from angles and distances where his opponents least expected. This natural ability to anticipate enemy movements and adjust his aim accordingly made him one of the deadliest fighter pilots in the skies over North Africa. Although the strategy was contrary to Luftwaffe gunnery training, Marseille achieved triumph after triumph without a loss, aiming where the enemy would be rather than where it was. He concluded the best time to open fire was when the enemy aircraft disappeared under his plane's nose during high-G maneuvers in a dogfight. While turning, his Bf-109's bullets would fall downward relative to his aircraft's flight path, requiring precise anticipation of the enemy's movements. Only the American and Japanese navies trained their pilots in deflection shooting, turning Marseille into one of the few Europeans who exploited this technique in the Western theater. Still, old habits die hard, and Marseille continued diving directly into the defensive circle of RAF formations to tear them apart from the inside. The German was not crazy by any means. On the contrary, he had a deep understanding of aerodynamics and British aircraft behavior, and more importantly, he knew the limitations of his trusty and reliable Messerschmitt Bf-109. Another unique talent of Marseille was his ability to quickly change his focus from one target to another as soon as he fired at the first, while remaining extremely accurate. When ground crews reloaded his magazines, they often found that he used as few as 10 rounds to take down an enemy. That was the trend. The Teutonic pilot employed an average of 15 rounds per victory, as recorded by the armorers who serviced his aircraft. As the war in Africa intensified, Marseille's average shootdowns during sorties was between 2 to 4 British aircraft. During one operation, Marseille got rid of 6 P-40s in just 6 minutes, achieving a similar feat as a week before, when he knocked out 7 hostile aircraft in 7 minutes. As Hans-Joachim Marseille's tally of downed Allied aircraft grew, his reputation as a fearsome pilot increased across all of Africa. Yet, beneath the warrior's battle fatigues, beat a heart marked by compassion. Driven by a deep sense of honor and humanity, the ace would personally venture out into the desolate terrains of the remote crash sites where his adversaries had fallen, extending a helping hand to the downed Allied pilots and also dropping messages over their bases so they could be picked up later. In the post-war, Marseille's Jagdgeschwader 27 friend Werner Schroer would state that they enjoyed downing enemies, but not taking lives. Quote, "We tried to separate the two. Marseille allowed us that escape. Our penance, I suppose." Nonetheless, there was no rest for the German ace. Under the intense heat of a single day in September 1942, Marseille achieved legendary status after plunging himself through British RAF formations with one objective: eliminate as many fighters as possible. He relentlessly pursued and downed 17 enemy aircraft across 3 sorties. This unique feat proved his air mastery and turned him into one of the Experten, the elite aces of the Luftwaffe. For his extraordinary courage and effectiveness in combat, Marseille was awarded the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords, and diamonds, one of the highest decorations of bravery and leadership a German airman and soldier could receive when he claimed his 100th aerial victory. Germany's propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, turned Marseille into a national hero, baptizing him as Der Stern von Afrika, the Star of Africa, and turned the pilot into one of the Reich's favorites. Numerous awards followed Marseille, including some from Benito Mussolini himself. As one of the Luftwaffe's elite, the young pilot was permitted some allowances, such as taking into his care a young black South African POW who became his aide. This reinforced Marseille's fascination with jazz music, a type of music he had enjoyed from a young age. It is said that while on a tour across Germany, Marseille was allowed to have dinner with the Führer at Willy Messerschmitt's home. While the usual chatter proceeded, the Iron Cross recipient was presented with the opportunity to use the piano and surprise the audience with some classical pieces. Still, the rebel inside consumed him, and he suddenly began playing American jazz, leaving the Führer and other attendees in total awe before the dinner proceeded. Following his victory parades across Germany, the Star of Africa returned to combat operations. On September 30th, 1942, Marseille took to the skies in the cockpit of a new Me-109G model, a machine he trusted less than his favored 109F, burdened by its notorious tendency for engine failures. As he returned from an uneventful Stuka escort mission, his fears came true. The engine faltered, and the cockpit was quickly engulfed in choking smoke. Marseille was guided back to base by his wingman until the smoke became unbearable, and the fighter was no longer flyable. Marseille rolled his fighter to begin the bailout, but did not notice his aircraft started a shallow, inverted dive, plunging the aircraft into the earth at a ferocious speed of over 400 miles per hour. Marseille was catapulted back into the aircraft's vertical stabilizer in those final, smoke-filled moments. This devastating collision either claimed his life instantly or left him too grievously injured to seek salvation in his parachute. Thus, the end came for the Star of Africa, not in a blaze of glory befitting his celebrated career, but in a harrowing dance with fate. Mechanical failure did what no enemy could. The rebel, the womanizer, the brave pilot, and the decorated airman with 158 air victories had perished without glory. Marseille's remains were transported to the Heroes Cemetery at Derna shortly after, where Commander Neumann and General Field Marshal Albert Kesselring delivered moving eulogies that honored the impressive fighting skills of the deceased pilot, remembered today as one of the top 10 aces of World War II.